Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the Buffalo Wings. And we are at the first year player draft for 2045. The 2045 season has been a pretty solid one for the Wings so far. 43 and 27 record through our first 70 games as we try to get back into the playoffs for an 18th consecutive season and try to become a repeat World Series champion for the first time in this playthrough. We've been dealing with a couple of pretty significant injuries. Our starting first baseman, Jim Reichert, and our starting shortstop, Damani Essien, have both been out with broken bones in their elbows for the entire season. Should have Reichert back by about the All-Star game, and we're hoping to see Essien sometime in early August. So it should be very helpful to our playoff chances and our potential opportunity to hold on to the NL East to get both of those players back in the medium term. But near term, we're going to be turning our attention to the first year player draft. We are picking 36th. At the end of the last episode, we simmed ahead right to our pick. So we knew who was available and appreciate the thoughts from those of you who shared what we should do in the draft. YME943 and David Chesley both ultimately came down in favor of the starting pitcher Caleb Leamy, who's a pretty interesting prospect, almost 19 years old, throws in the mid-90s. Looks like he could have a 3 to 4 pitch arsenal. If the changeup does develop to be a fourth pitch and possibly his best pitch, his stuff could be excellent. Even if the changeup doesn't develop, though, he's probably a 55 or 60 guy as far as his stuff, is if the fastball, the curve, and the sinker all develop the way that we hope they will. So it looks like he could be a pretty solid pitcher. Like his stamina, don't love his inability to effectively hold runners on base and his low intelligence. But as we talked about in the last episode, of the first 35 picks, about 80% of them were position players. Only about 20% of them were pitchers. So to have a relatively high-end pitching prospect like Leamy here late in the first round is certainly interesting. The other guy that I'm seriously thinking about is Joe Grennan, and both YME943 and David Chesley liked him as well. Jackhammer Possessor said that Grennan is the guy that he would go with. And I am pretty intrigued by him as well. A catcher with potentially above average contact and 65 home run power if everything works out, who's also got above average defensive ability and an above average arm, is a pretty interesting combination. Unfortunately, when I try to make a decision with the input of my scout, he doesn't really help me, because when I ask him his recommendation, it's Grennan the catcher. And when I ask him his recommendation for a starting pitcher, it's Caleb Leamy. So he likes the same two guys as me and the viewers who have opined. YME943 did bring up the good point that the catcher that we picked up in international amateur free agency, Sergio De Ases, is reasonably similar to the catcher that we're looking at here in the draft. De Ases' arm not as good and doesn't have the same type of home run power, but otherwise they are pretty similar players. Again, with a international amateur free agent and a high schooler that we're picking in the draft, the chance that 5 years from now both of them would be as good as we think they can be and fully developed at the same time is probably not incredibly high. And I do think that Grennan is a bit higher end than De Ases. But I think I'm going to make the relative value trade here in the first round. And with the dearth of pitchers that have been selected, Leamy is to me a player who probably goes in the 20s in most drafts, and he certainly could be a top 10 pick in some drafts if the caliber of pitching isn't incredibly high. So I tend to think with us coming up with another pick shortly, that because teams have, through the first 35 picks of this draft, focused so much on position players, I think there's almost no chance that Leamy is still going to be available when we pick again with our 42nd pick. I don't necessarily expect that Greinen's going to be available 6 picks from now either. But I think there's a slightly higher probability that Greinin is available. And if Greinin is not available, there are guys like Dave Bartkowski who are somewhat interesting that could be available. So it's pretty close to a coin flip with me, but got to make a decision. And we're going to go with the starting pitcher. David Leamy is our first round draft pick. Auto drafting to our next pick. Let's see who's available as far as the batters. And Greinin is actually still there, so that worked out really well for us. Got the pitcher that we like the best, and now we're getting the position player that we like the best with our supplemental pick that was earned by the qualifying offer that we made to Eric Barbarito this past offseason that he did not accept. So we end up with both LeMay and Greinin, and I think that's really a nice way to get this draft started. So both Leamy and Greinin were looking for a slot. We've offered slot to both of them, and we'll see who's available for us in the second round, but real happy to have picked up the starting pitcher and the position player that were both number one on our list by the time it got to us, with the 36th and the 42nd picks in the draft. And even though it's only the second round, don't really love any of the options that are available at this point. Our scouting director recommends we go with Ron Homuth. You may remember him. He's a guy that we looked at the end of the last episode. Not particularly inspired by him. He's got some home run power, got a little bit of speed. Not the greatest personality in the world, and although he's fleet in the outfield, he's not particularly good at handling the ball when he gets to it, and doesn't have much of an arm either. So we are going to go with Jonathan Adkins, shortstop, blazing speed, really good personality. He's not incredible defensively, but it does look like he could have well above average contact, gap power, and avoid strikeout ratings. Don't see him being a huge player, but think that there's potential that he could be a useful infielder for us, maybe just a utility infielder down the line. So we're going to go ahead and draft him. And there's another shortstop that's still available in the third round that we had our eye on as well. So we're going to go for Mike Gray now. A bit better defensively. Don't necessarily love that he's greedy and not the most loyal in the world, but he's been facing a good level of competition in high school and hit over 400 for his career. Bat looks very average if it fully develops, but looks like he could be a pretty interesting utility infielder type. Don't mind going with the shortstops back to back. Don't know that either of them is really a major league shortstop, but feel that between the two of them, we probably will at least get a pretty solid utility infielder out of this, and who knows, maybe one of them does develop into a starter 5 or 6 years from now. And we're on to the fourth round now. Our scout recommends a catcher, Dave Krugel, average fielder and not much of a hitter, given that we already picked a catcher with our supplemental first round pick, not a direction that we're going to go. We're actually going to go for starting pitcher here, Jeremy Webb, 18-year-old. He's going to need to develop certainly that curve and possibly that changeup to be really effective. Question the amount of movement he's going to have on his pitches as well as his control. But for a fourth-round pick, think that there's at least a chance he develops into a useful major league starter. So we're going to go ahead and draft Mr. Webb, move on to the 5th round, and Scout recommends in the 5th round Baldy Sweeney, starting pitching prospect. He's fragile already, but he does potentially have a 3 to 5 pitch arsenal. Not the worst prospect in the world. Similar to the guy that we just picked, his movement and control don't look to be exceptional, but he still could become a useful pitcher. We're going to do a little more scouting on our own before making a decision. And we're going to go off script here and not do what our scout recommends, but Davis Crawford is a guy we've kind of looked at. Potentially exceptional contact, gap power, and avoid strikeouts, similar to one of the shortstops that we picked up. Another guy with excellent speed, really good bunter. He's more of a corner outfielder, although he's listed as a center fielder right now, but he's durable. I think that he could end up being a pretty interesting hitter. Would love it if his eye was better. Right now it looks like he could be a guy who could be a 300 hitter but have about a 340 or 350 on base percentage, which isn't perfect, but it's also a 5th round player that we're drafting, and think that his signability is impossible. That could be why he's still lingering on the market. Let's just check. The one thing that we do have going for us is that we do have a lot of money right now. So that could be why Davis Crawford is still out there. But this is also the year where, particularly if we don't make a big trade and take on a huge contract, we've got the ability to pick a guy who's looking for much more money than slot and potentially insane amount of money, because the 5 guys that we picked so far are at slot, or in the case of Webb, slightly above slot. And even with the money we had set aside to sign our draftees, we've still got a lot of money on top of that. And we're going to take a flyer on Crawford, as we learned a couple of years ago in our draft. Just because a guy is impossible to sign, it doesn't always mean that they're asking for $12, $13, $14 million, although they often are, but not always. So we'll take a flyer on Davis Crawford. Probably won't look to sign him right away. We'll kind of let him linger for about a month or so and kind of think about his future before we engage with him and potentially sign him. We've simmed ahead to the late rounds of the draft, looking for our 16th round pick at this point, and it's just kind of interesting that Dave Krugel, the catcher that was recommended by our scout about 12 rounds ago, is still his recommendation at this point. Pretty glad that we did not accept that recommendation before, and again, given that I don't really think the guy can hit major league pitching, and he's only average defensively, think we will still roll the dice with somebody else, even though he's certainly better value now than he was when he was recommended some time ago by our scout. And we're finished with the draft now. In addition to the flyer on the impossible to sign Davis Crawford in the 11th round, we picked up Kellen Crocker. Don't know whether we'll sign him. With both of these guys, I think we're going to probably wait about a month till we have a better sense of what we may or may not be looking to take on in trade and exactly how much money we're going to have to spend. Certainly, I think Crawford is a higher ceiling player than Crocker, but depending on what they're looking for, we may make an offer eventually to either or none or both of them. We also picked up Zach Adams in the 8th round, who was looking for more than slot, but we made an offer to him. Decent personality and a borderline useful major league bat, really kind of most likely organizational filler, but you never know. And we've officially made it to the midway point of the season, 49-32 record through our first 81 games, so on pace for a 98-win season. We are in a flat-footed tie with the Washington Nationals for the National League East and also for the best record in the National League. The only team that we both trail for the best record overall is the Kansas City Royals, game behind them for the best record in baseball. Taking a look at the leaderboard here, as has been the case throughout the season, not much going on as far as the batting leaders. Chris Lott is still tied for second in the National League with 10 wins. But we're doing it not necessarily through any great individual performances, but through just solid play by most everyone on the team. That 49-32 record is one below Pythagorean expectations. We had an excellent April, an average May, a outstanding June, and we're 1-1 here in the very early stages of July. Rank 4th in the National League in runs scored, and you can see we're in the top half of every hitting category and in the top handful of many hitting categories. We've slipped back to second in the National League in runs allowed. Starters ERA is first, but our bullpen ERA is 12th, and our bullpen has been a big strength of this team for many years. So that could be an area where we may look for a little bit of help. Defensive efficiency, we're definitely middle of the pack, 11th in defensive efficiency and 8th in zone rating. So not playing quite as good defense as we did a year ago. Certainly if and when Essien is back and available, that should tighten up our infield defense. Only a couple days away from Reichert likely beginning rehab assignment. So our plan of having him back after the All-Star break seems just about perfect. And Essien's still 5 weeks away, so we will not see him until mid-August most likely. And we won't get to see what he can do on the team before the trade deadline, unfortunately. And before we finish up this episode, we'll do our usual mid-year review, take a look at how everyone is performing. The starting pitching, as we've talked about, has been outstanding, the best ERA in the National League. Jim Lance could be finally setting himself up for perhaps a Cy Young Award and almost certainly his first All-Star appearance. 9-4 record with a 2.46 ERA, 1 WHIP on the year, 2.9 WAR here midway through the season. Alexis Barajas, who we brought back after he opted out of his contract, only a 2-4 record a year after leading the National League with 18 wins, but a 2.99 ERA, 10.2 strikeouts per 9 inning, 2.5 WAR on the season. He still remains a very high-end performer. Chris Lott, as we've talked about, is tied for second in the National League with 10 wins, 10-3 record with a 3.45 ERA. He has been solid for us as a number 3 starter. The rookie Jim Coles has really done well. 8-1 with a 3.08 ERA, 91 strikeouts and 90 2/3 innings, 295 Sierra, and a 1.9 WAR. So he has been a more than competent number 4 starter. Similarly, Simeon Manelli has been a more than competent number 5 starter, 4-3 with a 3.24 ERA. So when Your worst ERA among your starters is a 3.45 ERA from a pitcher who is second in the National League in wins. You know that you've been getting some pretty high quality starting. Joe Scott has not been as good as usual as our reliever. You can see his ERA is ballooned to 4.84. He's really given up the long ball, and that's been the reason. 8 home runs allowed in 35 and a third innings. Hopefully he gets that straightened out. He's still a ground baller pitcher type, ground ball tendencies and above average movement on his pitches, so has probably just gotten a bit unlucky. His 2.76 SIERA suggests that that's probably the case, but midway through the season, with all those home runs allowed, he's actually been below replacement level for us. One guy who hasn't been below replacement level is Floyd Auclair, our excellent stopper, 102 strikeouts and 71 and 2/3 innings pitched, 3-1 record with 5 saves, 21 holds, as he attempts to lead the National League in both games and holds for a third consecutive season. Already put up a 2 WAR for us. Nate Ruckel, our former stopper, 2-0 with a 177 ERA, 41 strikeouts and 35 and 2/3 innings. He remains a key lefty out of our bullpen. Luis Palencia has had a bit of a rough year, 5.26 ERA, and he's walked 15 in 37 and 2/3 innings. BABIP is 309, which isn't glaring. It's in the middle of what he did his first 2 tries in the majors, although admittedly only one game a couple of years ago when he was coming back from an injury, I believe. But hasn't been great this year, but looking at his ratings, still think like he could be a pretty useful pitcher for us. Kevin Hale, lefty out of the pen, 4.66 ERA. His SIERA is 2 runs better than that, probably just a bit of bad luck. Mike Roberts, the right-hander, has not been good, 6.52 ERA. Another guy who's been victimized by the long ball a bit, giving up 4 home runs in 19 and a third innings, has struck out 27 batters, his BABIP close to 400 on the year. Hopefully that will normalize. Chris Powers has not been good, but it's a small sample size, but he has given up 24 hits in 14 innings in that small sample size, 12.21 ERA. His SIERA, though, is 3.98, and his BABIP is 4.60. You look at his pitching ratings and tend to think he'll probably be better in the second half of the year. And then our third lefty out of the pen is Joe Warner, 3.03 ERA over 35 and 2/3 innings, as he's having a second consecutive solid season for us out of the back end of our bullpen. So there's definitely several guys who have underperformed. Palencia, Hale, Roberts, and Powers all have ERAs in the mediocre to absolutely sickly range. Looking at their skill sets and in some cases the BABIPs against them, I think there's probably been a bit of bad luck driving some of those results, but certainly if we can add a big-time arm to our bullpen, it's certainly something we probably should consider in the coming month before the trade deadline. Turning now to our everyday players, and there may be more opportunity to improve here, although as I did talk about at the top of the episode, we still have our starting first baseman, Mr. Reichert, and our starting shortstop, Mr. Essien, who will be joining us in the not too distant future, hopefully, so we may not need to make dramatic moves here. Backup catcher Chris Malone hitting .294 and 68 at-bats. He's above average defensively, and he's been above average offensively in that small sample size, so certainly more than competent with what he's done for us. Juan Ramirez is hitting just .203, does have 8 doubles and 5 homers and 222 at-bats. Very good defensive catcher, but 69 WRC plus is not impressive. He's been 7/10 of a win above replacement level for us. I don't know if he's the long-term answer for us, especially because he's going to start making more money next year in his first year of arbitration eligibility. Love his defense. We're hoping for a little more in terms of his bat, but it is what it is at this point. Luis Comadran signed that extension with us a year and a half ago and has basically stunk ever since he signed that extension, hitting .211 this year with 7 homers and 26 ribbies and 227 at-bats, 78 WRC plus, and he's basically been a replacement level player. Not the greatest influence in the clubhouse. He is willing at this point to consider a trade to multiple teams. For a while, it was only just San Francisco, his former team, especially with Reichert coming back. Comadran's just been brutal since we signed him to that extension. He's not great in the clubhouse. He's a competent-ish first baseman or corner outfielder, but if he's not hitting, he doesn't have a ton of value. So maybe we look to move on from him. I think we're not going to get much at all back in return, but just getting his contract off our books might be something positive. Deshaun Seifu, the new Fordham Flash, only 74 at-bats on the year, 257 average, 4 doubles, 1 triple, and he's 5 for 5 on the base paths. 99 WRC plus is our DH against left-handed pitching, barely above replacement level. Looking at his statistics, he is 1 double away from 700, 3 triples away from 200, and he is now 3 stolen bases away from 1,300 for his career, as he finishes off a likely Hall of Fame career as a utility player for us. Ramiro Medina has been pretty solid ever since he came back from that injury, hitting .265, 15 doubles and 7 homers in 204 at-bats, putting up a 123 WRC plus and already a 2.4 WAR despite missing the first few weeks of the season. Good to have him in the lineup. Danny Ferguson is definitely struggling a bit this year, hitting just .213. That said, he does have 14 doubles and 10 homers, but he still has, when all is said and done, been a below-average offensive player as our third baseman. The former first-round draft pick of ours in 2042 out of Delta State looks to be a useful major leaguer at this point, but nothing exceptional. Steve Nickel has been our utility infielder this year, or one of our utility infielders, hitting .230, 57 WRC plus, slightly below replacement level. If and when Essien is finally healthy, Nickel's spot on the roster is definitely in jeopardy, and Mike Whitehead's spot as our starting shortstop will be in jeopardy when Essien is healthy, but that's still about a month away. He's been fine for us, hitting .281, 14 doubles, 2 triples, 7 homers, adds up to a 118 WRC plus and a 2.2 WAR. Honestly, with the way Whitehead is hitting, he may give Ferguson, if Ferguson continues to struggle, a little pressure as far as maintaining that starting third base role once Essien is ready to take over at shortstop. Turning to our outfielders, Tim Boston hitting .274 with 25 doubles already, 12 homers, 52 ribbies, 131 WRC plus. He got off to a bit of a slow start this year, but has been hitting real well of late. Useful player. He could conceivably be in the mix as a first baseman down the line, although hopefully Reichert will come back and be able to put a clamp on that position for the next 15 or 20 years. Josh Porter, 286 average, 14 doubles, 13 homers, 53 ribbies, 134 WRC plus. Bringing him back has proven to be a good decision as he's been an important part of our offense this year. Ishmael Velasco, kind of having a vintage Ishmael Velasco season. 282 average, 15 doubles, 15 homers, 12 out of 13, trying to steal bases. All adds up to a 136 WRC plus, 2.7 WAR, and an OPS of 843. So our center fielder remains a big-time offensive player and a pretty good defensive player as well. Great in the clubhouse, and the fans love him. When you're 27 years old and you are already a two-time World Series MVP, the fans are going to tend to love you. Edgar Canales, utility outfielder for us, 288 average with 12 doubles, 1 triple, and 3 homers and 153 at-bats, 114 WRC plus. He has been pretty solid for us since he missed that first week or so of the season on the IL. And then Juan Larios is the guy who only has a roster spot because of the injuries that we've had. The youngster had played only 8 games in AAA before this season, hitting .243. Does, though, have 18 doubles, 3 triples, and 9 homers for us. So he's been about a league average offensive player. The fact that he's kind of holding his own as a major leaguer does make me feel like maybe instead of sending Larios down when Riker is ready to come back, maybe we do look for a trade to move on from Coma Duran since he's been such a disappointment. We'll shop him right here just to let you see in real time with me what, if any, demand there is for him. I'm not expecting it to be overwhelming. And there's actually some offers out there, but for the most part, it's either extremely expensive players with really bad contracts or kind of replacement level-ish type players. But there are a few options out there for us at least to visit with him if we decide that getting that contract off of our books makes sense. Taking a look at who's actually available on the trade block at this point. Taking a look at the batters, Luis Ortega has been on the trade block pretty much all season. A very high-end bat who is a solid defensive catcher, making $54 million in the last year of his contract with the Phillies. Would be tough to fit that contract in even with the money we have. But if we could do something with perhaps Coma Duran to get Ortega, maybe there's something there. Max Clark, 40-year-old, who we had on our team many years ago, still a pretty useful left-handed hitter when he's healthy, but he's wrecked physically. Still hitting .304, though, with 19 doubles and 5 homers as a 40-year-old. So he's held up a bit better than the likes of our 41-year-old Deshaun Seifu in terms of his production. Mike Brodin, another guy who was on our team years ago. Our old friend Juan Romero is available as well. Jorge Berrios, our former catcher. So some interesting names available. Don't know if there's any huge difference makers, but really don't know if we need a huge difference maker either. Taking a look at the top pitchers who are available, decent number of higher end relievers available. Just kind of a quick look at the ratings. A couple interesting guys: Vincenzio Brunetti, Ramiro Esquilin, both pretty balanced in terms of their profiles. Look like they could be useful. Don't know that there's a huge difference maker out there. But again, I don't know that we need a huge difference maker at this point. Have about $17 million to potentially take on some contracts. And the only guys that we haven't signed now are the 5th rounder Davis Crawford and the 11th rounder Kellen Crocker, both of whom are allegedly impossible to sign. Probably going to wait until we get through the trade deadline, see exactly what kind of money we do have left. If we do end up trading away Coma Duran, that could perhaps open up enough money for us to go after both of them. So we're going to have some interesting decisions to make over the next month before we get to the trade deadline. Fortunately, with that 49-32 record, we're going to be making them from a position of strength. You can see we've been selling out most of our games recently, so we're actually going to just bump the ticket price up a little teeny tiny bit to hopefully generate a little bit of extra money for our profit-oriented and economizing owner, Chris Ames. So as we reach the midway point of this season, feeling pretty solid about how the Buffalo Wings have performed. And as I mentioned, with the potential that we'll have Reichert back after the All-Star break, because he's going to need to go on a rehab assignment over the next week or so, and then potentially have an Essien back in the beginning of August, feel that even if we aren't incredibly active at the trade deadline, we're going to be a better team a month and a half from now than we are today. So feeling good about how this season has gone, even though we're in a very tight battle with the Washington Nationals right now for the National League East, as well as the best record in the NL. And we'll find out what, if any, reinforcements we're able to bring on board through the trade market in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.